Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at World's Worst Comics Awards, number 1 and number 2, published in 1990 and 1991 by Kitchen Sink Comics. This is the creation of writer James Schumeister and artist Rich Larson. James Schumeister, all I could find out about him was he had one story in the underground comic Commies from Mars, and he did like a daily syndicated strip he wrote. I couldn't even find the title of it. I just know he did that. And Rich Larson was in many undergrounds, ground level comics, and even did a Whisper from Capitol Comics, early independent comic in the 80s. He never really worked for the big two, though, but all throughout the 70s, he'd always pop up. And as you can tell by the cover art, it's kind of interesting seeing Rich Larson draw, like, funny. He never drew funny, really. His stuff was serious. And it's pretty nice, pretty pleasing to the eye, his cartooning. And these are kind of odd comics. I mean, you can tell already. So here at the Hercules Academy, we have one of the finest curated libraries of comic books in, well, at least west of the Mississippi River. And the reason why is because ever since maybe my late teenage years, early 20s, every year or two, I would have a process of weeding out. I would go through my comics, because I usually needed room. And I'd be like, do I really need this? I'd reread comics, I'd flip through them, and I'd be like, this isn't really that great, or I don't really care if I get rid of this. So over the years, I've kind of fine-tuned my collection. This one, which I've had probably since the early 90s, about 25 years, this has made it through so many weedings. I pretty much always reach for this and think, this is the year I'm going to get rid of this, right? And every time I flip through it, I find myself chuckling and having a good time, basically. So I still haven't gotten rid of these. They're not the best comics, but they're fun. And I guess you'll find out for yourself. We'll see if you agree. Let's look at the first issue. And pretty sharp cover by Larson. And we see Richard Larson and James Schumeister here. And they're introducing us to the comic. And let's start with the actual comic. And basically the artifice of this comic, or the whatever pretense, is that this is an award show for the world's worst comics. Our hosts for the night are this guy Jean Paul and this guy Robert, who are obviously doppelgangers of Siskel and Ebert, who were pretty popular at the time. They were both alive. And we also have a presenter, or whatever you call, I don't know, just like the Vanna White, is this woman named Barry, who's kind of like basically just va-va-voom. It's a little piece of eye candy for us to look at, I guess. And the writing is pretty funny. James Schumeister throws a lot of funny jokes in here. And it's pretty sharp writing. And as you can see, once again, like I said, I think this cartoon is pretty nice. They say how they're doing this for ecological reasons. When you think about all the trees felled for shitty comics, like here's the Mojave National Forest before Batman the Cult, and here it is after. And now it's a desert. And so Barry here she explains the rules. They're only considering like kind of, mainstream publishers. So they're not going to rack some fanzine made by a 14-year-old over the coals. It's just like, they basically say companies and creators who should have known better. And they're also keeping themselves to a 25-year limit. So basically comics from 1955 on. I guess they figured there's so many goofy comics from the Golden Age that it would be a 50-issue miniseries. So we start off with the world's worst male costume. And They show the original drawing of Silver Surfer, where he says, "All hail the big Kahuna Galactus," and then we get on with the actual awards. I can't believe this was real. In the 70s or the late 60s, the Blackhawks became a superhero team, and one of the guys became the Listener. And he has a blue jumpsuit with all these ears, flesh-colored ears drawn on it. It's, just the power, the name and his powers are ridiculous. He can listen really well. It's almost like that Rusty Brown comic, I believe it was, where that was his superpower, his good hearing. They basically nominate Robin, all of his iterations, all the various Robins behind the mask, mainly because of his little hot pants that he wears, which just always look ludicrous and a little off-putting. The Black Racer from New Gods, Arnim Zola, always just, I love that. Whatever, it's beyond a costume. It's a complete organism with his face in his chest. Only Kirby could come up with that. Mbwana Beast. This guy Razorback with a giant fucking boar head. It's ridiculous. But this one takes the cake. Look at this guy. He's called the Vegetable. I guess he was a supervillain in one of those Archie superhero comics from the 60s. And they don't tell us what his powers are, but I don't think I want to know. And then I guess the winner is the Phantom of the Penitentiary from one of those previously mentioned Archie superhero comics. And all of a sudden, the creature from Robot Monster, that 50s black and white sci-fi movie, he shows up and he says, you basically ripped off my whole look, which he kind of does. Basically, Robot Monster has these little antennas on his helmet. And he basically, he shoots him. He kills the Phantom. So they give the award to the Vegetable. Who just, God, what a weird looking character. He thinks Clarence Birdseye. The whole audience is booing the whole time. They have these little asides here. Factoids of the damned. When did Superboy lose his virginity? And apparently, Superboy, there's a comic book in the 77 where Superboy, we see him getting all cozy with this girl, and we see a silhouette, and then it's like the next morning, Clark never came home, so obviously spent the night with this girl. And so somehow they slipped this past the comic code. Of course, there's some stupid explanation how, whatever. It's very odd. I don't even want to get into it. It's like, even though Mort Weisinger wasn't at DC at the time, it sounds as crazy and dumb as anything Mort Weisinger came up with. And now we get to the worst female costume. The interesting thing about reading this comic again, I probably haven't looked at this in, 10 years or so, but a lot of this, the fun of this comic has kind of been subsumed by the internet. A lot of these things which were, in 1990, this was like, whoa, I never saw this. And these are all popular memes now on Instagram, all these like zany comic book covers from olden times. This one is pretty amazing, though, just showing the tenor of the times in the late 60s or early 70s, where Batman and Robin are like, come on, Batgirl, we need your help. And she's like, I can't, I have a run in my tights. Like, just this totally sexist, dumb gag, And we see Supergirl and all of her bizarre, the iterations of her costume. These are really odd. But this is the oddest. Laurel Kent. I think she was in Legion of Superheroes. And she's basically just wearing a smock with no clothes underneath. And I like how they give her like a cup with a sign that says help. Because she does look like some homeless waif. Looker, Ms. Marvel. And then I remember these characters from the 70s, Necra and Ecstasy. And it's kind of hard to believe that the Comics Code Authority okayed these costumes. They definitely get the thumbs up from me, especially when I was 13. I like their costumes a lot. I would say they're the best costumes ever made for a female comics character. The Butterfly. And the winner, though, is Queen Ula. And this was from Captain Victory, Jack Kirby's swan song. I don't know, I like almost all of Kirby's designs, but this beehive is pretty ludicrous. And in fact, the weight of it makes her fall over and she can't get up. Next, we have a little thing about bad ads. And this is just a kind of a anti-tribute to all the stupid ads that were in comics. Of course, Sea Monkeys and the Charles Atlas ad, the famous one. I guess at the time that these ads were popular, I mean, they were popular for decades, but they were still in like comics in 1976. And Charles Atlas had been dead for years already. They just kept running the ads as if Charles Atlas was still alive. In fact, he was quite old. He was like, I don't know, he was born in like 1910 or something. X-ray specs, Hypnocoin. These were all such bullshit. I don't know how they got away with it for so long. I guess there was no Better Business Bureau back then. But these are, like, obviously all scams. But they were allowed to prey on dumb children for decades. Rub the Buddha for money. I remember this one. It says, this is pretty offensive. Can you imagine in Japan someone selling crucifixes through the manga ads with the headline, "Masturbate the Messiah for yen"? And so the winner is the Twinkie, the Hostess ads. And they do a parody of it where they use the edgy characters of the, late 80s for a Hostess ad. And it's Electra Assassin, Last Stand. And it's a pretty dead-on parody of Electra Assassin by Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz. And it's kind of funny. Really nasty. Electra throws this... I guess they didn't want her to have a sigh, so it would be so obvious, like for parody purposes. But she throws this like kind of spear at this kingpin doppelganger's throat. And then she sucks the creamy filling from his throat. That's so nasty. Now we have the Worst Name in Comics, hosted by this Andy Rooney parody from 60 Minutes. Our Man, Man Thing. Surprisingly, they don't even mention Giant Size Man Thing, which has been a running gag since, I don't know, for 50 years now. This guy, God Wolf. So dumb. She-Hulk. Yes. What next? Him Hulk? You Hulk? Me Hulk? Action Boy? Toy Boy? And this should have won. It's Jack Kirby's Paranex, the Fighting Fetus. That's just insane. Speedball. And there's the vegetable again. I guess the Creature Commando is the vampire in that. His name was Velcro. That's pretty dumb. This character with frozen power or cold powers called Crispy. That's terrible. But I love this. I totally agree with this. They give the Lifetime Achievement Award to Steve Ditko. I love this. They show this list of all of various characters that Steve Ditko has named over the years. And, they ask you to guess who did this. I kind of knew already, because Stack Ray, that's from Shades of Change Man. But if you guys have watched this show, I've commented often on Steve Ditko's insane diction and also his ridiculous names. Like, they're not even like English words or English sounding. Ort Krim, Farah Search, Dr. Pet. And these aren't like aliens. It's not like he's naming Zoltar or something. These are like just gangsters or whatever, normal people. And he gives them these insane names. I don't know where he gets them from. Ike Murr. Really crazy. So Steve Ditko wins. Of course, he doesn't show up to receive the award. And next we have Woefully Wretched Words, which is just kind of a showcasing, or highlighting, I should say, highlighting some of the worst dialogue from comics over the years. And they don't show the art. I guess they don't want to get for copyright reasons. But there's some amazing stuff here. Some of these make me want to read the comic. Look at this. There's a early 70s Wonder Woman written by Samuel R. Delany, where Wonder Woman is saying, in most cases, I don't even like women. I got to see what the context of that is. But this is some bad stuff. It seems like a lot of this stuff is from Brother Power the Geek, which there's a video of that on the channel if you're interested. I think it's fun as hell, but it is pretty ridiculously zany. I guess they give the award to Roy Thomas for his combination of unnecessary exposition, useless facts, and warmed over cuteness. And I think this was pretty dead on. This is one thing about James Schumeister, the writer. He really does seem to know his comics, and I actually agree with most of his assessments. They give a bunch of examples of Roy Thomas. These are really just hard to read. And I like how they also mention that there's sentences that no human would ever utter in real life. And there's a lot of comics writers from olden times where you're like, nobody would ever say that in a million years. Here's another factoid of the damned. What isn't in Batman's utility belt? The answer, condoms. Because they talk about the Son of the Demon graphic novel, 1987, where it appears that Batman gets down with Talia and she has a kid. At the time, this was just totally forgotten about. It was almost, I don't know if it was written out of canon, but they didn't want to talk about it until, of course, Grant Morrison brought back the Son of Batman. Here we have the Worst Team Awards, and we see that Blackhawk superhero team mentioned earlier. This looks so bad. For some reason, Blackhawk is called Big Eye. The Leaper. There's the Listener, the guy we saw earlier. And the French guy, Andre, is now Monsieur Machine. And Chop Chop is Dr. Hands, which I guess is a less offensive name for a Chinese guy. He also looks way different than he did in the 40s, thank God. And they give us some of the dialogue. Oh, it's so sad, like trying to make the Blackhawks like hip and, you know, part of the go-go pop art generation, you know, the late 60s. They kind of worked, because it was the 60s, they worked for a secret agency called George. You know, like Man from U.N.C.L.E. Everything was acronyms back then. That was the cool thing. Thunder Agents. George stands for Group for Extermination of Organizations of Revenge, Greed, and Evil. That's all I have to say to that. That is so freaking dumb. How did these guys get away with shit like this? Oh, this one I actually want to read so bad. I don't have this issue. I have a lot of Mort Weisinger era Superman stuff. But apparently Crypto joined the SPCA, the Space Canine Patrol Agents. Wait, did I get that wrong? The SCPA. And not only are these dogs with superpowers from around the galaxy, they also look like they have the dumbest superpowers ever. Tusky Husky, he has one big tusk. Tail Terrier, whose tail is kind of like Plastic Man. I don't know, well, Crypto is just Crypto. Hot Dog, who I guess is like the Human Torch of dogs. Bulldog, who has these horns. Paw Pooch, and Chameleon Collie. I've got to read that story. That is probably so dumb, it's brilliant. Those were and they mentioned the Legion of Super Pets, who I also have a fondness for, but for some reason they're disqualified. I can't remember why. And then we get to the winner. Oh no, not quite yet. This group called the Fab Four. So they were trying to tap in to Marvel Comics popularity and the Beatlemania at the same time. And they were published by Dell. I never saw these, and I don't want to. They sound terrible. Look at the stupid names of them. L, High, Crispy, we saw him earlier, and Polymer Polly. That's like that Beatles song, Polythene Pam. And yeah, it sounds really terrible. But the winner is the Mighty Crusaders, which was the 60s Archie superheroes. They put them all into a team. And it was, those comics are really bad. They were so trying to be like Marvel, but they didn't understand what made Marvel tick. They just thought, oh, if our superheroes bicker a lot, it'll be like Marvel. That's the secret of Marvel, right? And they give us some of the dialogue. It's terrible, like trying to be hip, 48-year-old guy trying to be hip with his dialogue. It sounds really bad. In fact, I should probably try to read these because they're probably a lot of fun. But I've read from some reviews that they're not even fun. That's how bad they are. They're just pathetic. And that's the end of this issue. And one of the factoids of the damned is about the Kiss comic, which was printed with their own blood. And here's a fake ad for a sumowazi, which is a martial art where basically you just eat a lot, get really fat, and when someone attacks you, you just kind of fall down on them and crush them. It's written pretty well. It definitely is a good parody of those ads that were in the back of comics. Now we have number 2, and this actually was polybagged, even though there was nothing in it to protect. There wasn't a trading card, but it was polybagged, I guess, just for this gag, and also to comment on the trends at the time. All these stupid, comic enhancements were coming out. So they just basically make a joke out of it. They're like, please open this bag, we're running out of air. Polybag to help you practice safe comic reading. And now we get into part 2. They talk to the accountant who tallies the votes, and he's just a miserable wretch. Kind of funny stuff. And then we get into bad science. I like this how in this sequence it almost seems like Larson uses more shading. Maybe he's trying to be like a more EC-like. And they introduce Mr. Empiricism, who's basically like a Mr. Wizard knockoff. A kid show host who teaches kids about science. He asks for a volunteer from the crowd, and this little kid Bobby comes up, who's a big comic fan. And Bobby's convinced that everything that happens in comics is true, so he says, well, we're going to give you superpowers then, just like in the comics. So first, he basically says, would you like to be as strong as the Hulk? And Bobby's like, sure. So they irradiate him with the equivalent of a gamma bomb. And of course, it doesn't give him super strength. It gives him horrible tumors, and his hair is falling out, and he feels bad. And when the kid looks at his tumors, he says, oh, am I hulking out now? And the guy says, no, I'm afraid not. You just have carcinoma now. And then they talk about vibrating through a wall like the Flash. So they tie a vibrator to his back and throw him into the wall. Of course, it doesn't work. This is a really kind of sick strip where they're just abusing this poor child. He says, would you like to fly, Bobby? And apparently that Fab Four group, Polymer Polly, she could fly, and they would explain her powers is because she was frictionless. That's how she could fly, which doesn't make sense, I don't think. I'm no scientist, but... So they spray him in Pam, non-stick spray, and throw him off of a building. Excuse me. Let me get some water. And of course, he splats to the ground. Then he says, well, the Human Torch is lighter than air because of his fire powers. Let's try that. He douses him in gasoline and lights him on fire. The kid's like, please, I don't want superpowers anymore. Stop. Pretty weird little interlude. Your comics code at work. And here they're just pointing out some egregious things that slipped by the comics code. And this is from an Archie horror comic from the early 70s. And looks pretty gruesome. I think that, and they show the comics code standard that they're breaking. You know, scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. And we see this kid's body being like burned off by acid, it looks like. We see this ad for Vampirella model kits, which is pretty gruesome. And some extreme gore on the cover of Batman. Look at this Wonder Woman cover. It's like something from Bloodsucking Freaks. It's definitely goes against lurid illustration shall be eliminated. Rape should never be shown or suggested. They show that infamous, I can't remember who wrote it, but when Ms. Marvel gave birth to that guy who grew up really fast and then kind of, I mean, it was kind of shown as a seduction or like a mind fuck, but those were weird issues. Probably Jim Shooter wrote those. Then we get the Myron Fass Memorial Trophy for Lifelong Underachievement. And Myron Fass is responsible for a lot of schlock getting to the stands. And they give it to Lois Lane first, just for being such a dummy for like decades. But also for her crazy 70s comics when she tried to be relevant. This is a popular meme now on Instagram. This is hard to believe it's not photoshopped. In one issue of Lois Lane, she actually went into this weird machine that turned her black. Turned her into an African-American woman. I Am Curious Black, it was called. Talk about cultural appropriation. That was a real comic. This one is amazing. We see Lois Lane dressed in Native American garb, and Superman saying, Lois, you must give up that Indian papoose now for your own safety. And she's saying, never, he's my baby. And so it's just like obviously probably Mort Weisinger era, where it's just that whole idea of like, you have to buy the comic to find out what is the explanation behind this inane, ludicrous situation, right? But just like, I want to read this now. This would work on me. Why does Lois have a Native American baby? And why is she wearing a papoose? It's just nuts. And then they give it to Steve Trevor, Wonder Woman's long-suffering, not long-living boyfriend. I guess Steve Trevor just kept dying. He would die. Like, I think he died 2 or 3 times, but he was too stupid to stay dead, they say. But yeah, he was quite the dummy. I wish they gave us some more examples of Steve Trevor. Now we get into the worst series. Here's those Dell comics from the 60s where they tried to turn Dracula and Frankenstein into superheroes. Such a dumb idea. And apparently they're just written and drawn by the worst in comics. They're really bad. We see this Captain Marvel who has no relation to any of the Captain Marvels, the many Captain Marvels there are. This was this Myron Fass, actually. He started this company in the 60s. It just seemed like they were just trying to rip other companies' IP off as much as they could. So they were right, though. Captain Marvel had slipped out of public domain, but Marvel had snatched it up. So they had to cease and desist that after 2 issues. But there's a character named Plastic Man. There's a character named Dr. Fate. I guess this guy just thought all the lawyers were on vacation at Marvel and DC. And it was very short-lived. Look at his crazy powers, though. Captain Marvel, whenever he yelled split, his appendages would fly off and his head. And I guess they could operate independently. It might be kind of fun reading this comic. Actually, I would kill for this comic. This is probably great fun. I think this is by the same guys who did Fat Man, the Human Flying Saucer, which was a C.C. Beck's 60s comic. I have a couple of those. Those are amazing. really dopey, fun comics. But next we have Ms. Mystic. I remember buying this off the stands when it came out in like 82, I believe. And, I was just like, oh my God, a new comic drawn by Neil Adams? That hadn't happened in years. It was big news. But even as I was probably 14, it was shit. And I could tell it was shit. It was almost unreadable. There was a noble purpose behind it. She was kind of fighting for the environment and nature. But it is so dumb. Even though the art's pretty nice. It's nice Neil Adams art. But it is really crappy. Here's one of those 60s Archie superhero comics. They're in these two comics a lot. They had put out a lot of shit. And we have, there's the vegetable again. I just still don't know what his powers are. I wonder if he controlled vegetables or if he could throw them into your eye and poke your eye out. I don't know. They give us some of the dialogue, and oh God, it's so bad. It's such tortured diction. It's really hard to read. I like this factoid of The Damned, where they tried to shame comics professionals who had their letters as children. They had their letters published on the letters page. And look, here's a young P. Craig Russell. He was like all into these shitty comics. So they're basically saying we can blackmail these guys now. And I believe the winner here is Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers, Jack Kirby's last major comic from the 80s. These are pretty sad, guys. Just seeing the king of comics. He got a little, getting a little dotty in his old age. And they really are just so poorly written. And the art's getting sloppy. There's still some great art in Captain Victory. I have most of the issues. I'm still missing two. I've been trying to find for decades. There is some amazing 2-page spreads. And but then a lot of just you could tell Kirby's getting old. He's getting tired. He doesn't want to put in as much work. Yeah, some of this dialogue is just it's really bad. Some mangled syntax, that's for sure. And so now we get to the worst 10 single comics, the worst comics of all time, the top 10 countdown. Neutro number 1 from Dell. They say it's not the worst comic as far as quality. They just say it's the dullest comic ever made, which kind of makes me want to read it. But I'm sure as soon as I read 2 pages, I wouldn't. But it almost sounds fascinating in its slowness and dullness. Almost like a Tarkovsky film or a soap opera. But here's Blue Beetle, the 66 incarnation. And I like this mummy. They describe him, he's supposed to be this formidable monster. And they describe him as an anorexic who had a bad run-in with some toilet paper. We see that Frankenstein comic where he's, a superhero, kind of a superhero. Obviously, they were trying to make their own Hulk. But they didn't want to get sued. So this already looks ludicrous, his outfit. But apparently he was colored. His face was green, but his arms were flesh-colored. So he looked even dumber in color, I imagine. Todd Holton's Super Green Beret, another 60s comic. And I think this was also from the comic company that did Fat Man, the Human Flying Saucer, and the other one. And this one sounds crazy. It's almost like the Captain Marvel from the 40s, Shazam. A little boy who, when he rubs this magic gem, he turns into a grown man, a Super Green Beret, who constantly goes over to Vietnam to fight the Viet Cong. And then at the end of every adventure, he's back in school, back in America, just living like a normal kid. I gotta get this. It sounds so crazy. And also, it was published at the height of the Vietnam War, 67. So just a really weird idea. Of course, we got Brother Power the Geek number 1, which probably deserves to be there. I fucking love it though. And, but I guess it's not good. They give us a lot of the crazy dialogue. And they describe the whole plot, which rereading it synopsized like this, I'm like, yeah, that plot made no sense at all. It's just Joe Simon is just, I think, writing off the top of his head. And then we get that Chilling Adventures in Sorcery is Told by Sabrina. September 1972. This was that Archie comic we were talking about earlier, where it was very strange. They tried to do a horror comic, and as we saw, very horrific. And yet it was drawn in the style of Archie by the typical Archie artists were drawing it. So it's a very weird combination of this cartoony art and horrific tales. I guess there's stories of suicide in there and Satanism. But I got to get this. This sounds amazing. And the art I've seen from it, I think I saw a page. It does look kind of cool, seeing that art style doing horror. Well, maybe not cool, just bizarre. Next, we have one of those Flyman comics, another Archie superhero comic from the 60s. God, I can't even read this title. Phantasmon the Terrible and his Aliog Laboids versus Flyman and Fly Girl. And apparently the villain would shoot rays from his nostrils. They show a little picture of it. So maybe I do need to read this before I die. This just sounds crazy. There's a character called the Mighty Minstrel in it. I can imagine how dumb he is. Then we have Captain Victory. And the host had to strain to pick which one, because they're all so bad. So he picks number 7. They give us some of the dialogue. It's gigantic, as big as 4 galaxies. But what in solar soap suds is it? Oh, Jack, that's so sad. It's, I guess maybe Stanley was kind of necessary for your success in the 60s. And I hate to say that. Look at this crazy Paranex's mom. That's the fetus we saw earlier. So nuts. Next, we get the Mighty Crusaders, another one of those Archie comics superheroes. This is their version of the Avengers. They basically took all their superheroes and put them on a team. But then I guess this issue, they wanted to have a big Donnybrook with all the superheroes fighting each other. The title is even called Too Many Superheroes. So they even brought superheroes out of retirement and just like made up superheroes for the event. And it doesn't make any sense, apparently. And the old heroes are like running around saying things like razzmatazz and poop poop padoop, 23 skidoo. God, that's terrible. But I have to read that too. And the number 1 worst comic is Skate Man #1, another Neil Adams comic from the early 80s. I bought this too. I was very excited to buy it. And as soon as I read it, I don't know what I did with it, but it didn't end up on my comic collection for long. And once again, the art's pretty nice. It's nice Neil Adams art, but it is so dumb. This guy gets back from Vietnam, and he starts fighting crime on roller skates, skating around. And he becomes a champion of migrant workers, even though he's this weirdo with long blonde hair. And he has a little friend named Paco, his little sidekick, who apparently when Paco first meets Skate Man, he calls him pig meat, which I don't know if that's a slur about Americans down in Mexico. And it makes no sense. It's just crap. And then Skate Man actually show up at the award ceremony with Paco, calling him pig meat. And I guess they want revenge for making fun of him. But Jean-Pierre is ready, and he has some Italian salad dressing, and he pours it on the ground, and they all crash. Skate Man and Paco crash. I like how off-screen, it's almost like they explode, like it's a car explosion. And that's the end. And then they do a special worst comic of 1990, and it's Spider-Man #1 by Todd McFarlane, which had probably just come out at the time, and had sold millions of copies. And that's it for World's Worst Comics Awards #1 and #2. I hope you guys didn't mind looking at these. You're probably thinking these are the world's worst comics in the herculespetix Academy library, and maybe they are. And yet I still can't kick them out of the Academy. I still had a really good time flipping through these last night. And maybe because I don't look on the internet much, these are still valuable to me. I'm sure all this stuff is on the internet. There's probably a whole blog about stupidest supervillains of all time. But I like having it here. And it's really fun. It's kind of, there's some good jokes, some nice cartooning. So, I don't know. Maybe if I do a weeding in a few years, it won't make it. But it's made it for 25 years, so I think they're going to stick around. So I hope you guys thought it was okay. If you're interested in buying these went straight to quarter bins, literally. Like the next month they were in quarter bins. So you could probably find them very cheap. And hope you liked today's video, and I hope to see you next time here at the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.